I came across this topic completely by accident. I just started reading I'm Malala, a book I'm sure many of you are familiar with. Malala was only 15 when she was shot in the head at close range by a Taliban soldier. She survived the ordeal and has gone on to become a human rights and female education activist and the youngest person to win the Nobel Peace Prize. Somewhere in the first few pages of the book, she speaks about how she traveled to Nigeria to stand in solidarity and with the families of those affected by the girls kidnapped from the Chibok boarding school. She also met with the Nigerian president and urged him to declare a state of emergency in education. Now, I'm sure many of you heard of the iconic hashtag of Bring Back Our Girls that went viral in 2014. Michelle Obama, Ellen DeGeneres, Dwayne Johnson, South African model Simone de Kock, and so many other celebrities jumped on the bandwagon to show their support and in an effort to raise awareness, posted photos of themselves with this hashtag. There were protests in many cities across the world, and the story was recounted on almost every news channel globally. In essence, it became a media frenzy. However, just like many of the other horrific stories we hear, the media frenzy was washed away by a new wave of bad news, and soon it was hardly recounted at all. I'll admit, I hardly thought about it over the years following. However, once reminded, I decided to search what the outcome was, being that I hardly knew much about the case at all. Seeing that it's more than 4 years later, I fully expected to hear that the girls had been safely returned to their families. But before I delve into the event and the subsequent aftermath, I think it's important to give you some background. Boko Haram are Islamic extremists, essentially a Nigeria's terrorist group that emerged in 2002 under the name of the Nigerian Taliban. After their founder was executed, Abubakar Shekau took over in 2009 and renamed them the Taliban. They pledged allegiance to ISIS in 2014, but not before President Jonathan declared a state of emergency in 2013. Boko Haram loosely translates to Western education as forbidden. They believe that Western education drives individuals further away from the teaching of Islam and do anything in their power to prohibit this. This, coupled together with their belief that women have no right to education and should be married off at a young age with their sole purpose to meet the needs of their husband and men in general. On the night of 14th of April, 2014, 276 girls between the ages of 16 and 18 were kidnapped from Chibok Girls Boarding School in Borno State, Nigeria. It's worth mentioning that Nigeria has the highest rate of out-of-school girls in the world. These brave girls had come from all over Nigeria and attended Chibok to write their final physics exam before the unthinkable happened. Although the teachers' houses surrounded the school, with the entrance of Boko Haram and the mass gunfire that ensued, the teachers, staff, and security fled the scene, leaving the girls trapped and alone on the school grounds. They were loaded into trucks and with threats that they'd be shot or doused in petrol and set alight if they did not obey instructions. They drove through the dead of night through the Sambisa forest, but as the journey progressed through the harsh terrain, the gap between the vehicles extended marginally, and one of the girls by the name of Sa made the decision to jump from the moving vehicle and run into the Sambisa forest away from her captives. She convinced her cousin to do the same, and soon the two of them were running through the dead of night in a completely unknown area. This set an example with many other girls doing the same, some of whom ran for up to 2 days through the forest with slashed feet, no idea where they were, and the inability to trust anyone. A month later, a video was released by Abubakar Shekau claiming the kidnapping of all the girls and stating that slavery is allowed in his religion. He also claimed that the girls should not have been at school and should have been married off since girls as young as 9 are suitable for marriage. That same month, some civilians found 2 girls that had been sexually abused and left for dead tied to a tree. Apparently, there had been 4 more girls buried nearby. Over the next few months, 57 girls managed to escape, 4 of who walked for 3 weeks to freedom in Nigeria after being kept captive in a camp in Cameroon. Amira Ali was one of the girls rescued with her baby, both of whom were severely malnourished. She told of how non-Muslim students were forced to convert to Islam and sold as child brides for the equivalent of 80 rand. By 2015, the Nigerian government was still unable to locate most of the girls, and he demanded proof of life. What he got in return was a horrific video of acts of sexual violence. Lots of the girls had already had babies, and 18 of them seriously ill, some with HIV. Finally, in 2016, hopes began to rise as 21 girls were released from Boko Haram in exchange for 5 Boko Haram leaders. Last year, intervention from the Swiss government and the Red Cross saw 83 more girls released in exchange for a ransom of 3 million euros. Currently, at this very minute, there are still 112 girls missing and 13 presumed dead. I was shocked to discover that on the 19th of February this year, over 100 more girls were kidnapped from a town in northeast Nigeria. This was not on the news, and there was no media frenzy. Exact figures are hard to come by, but Amnesty International estimates that 2,000 girls were kidnapped just between 2014 and 2015 alone. There have been 14 mass abductions since 2015, and reports of kidnapping happen on a regular basis. This story had a huge impact for me. Firstly, the trauma that these girls went through at such a young age, both the sexual and physical abuse. The ones that did return home spoke about the stigma that they faced, claiming that integration back into society was near impossible. Secondly, owing to the mass violence, over 1/3 of the girls who did return home came back to find that their families had all been killed in Boko Haram attacks. Over 20,000 people have died and 2 million have been displaced since 2015 alone. Thirdly, I was shocked at how little awareness there was around this. From an educational point of view, over 2,200 teachers have been killed and over 1,500 schools have been destroyed. Of the schools that do still stand, 57% of them are not open due to the insurgents. Little is said about the terrorist attacks in our country, yet we know so much about the rest that happens in the world. On the 7th of January 2015, the world was shook by the Charlie Hebdo terrorist attack that took place in Paris, claiming 12 lives. Yet on the same day, 2,000 people were killed in Boko Haram attacks in northeast Nigeria. This was never documented anywhere. As tragic as the story is, the facts are that it's ongoing. I think why it hit home so hard for me is that these girls were at the same age that my little sister is now. I couldn't imagine something so terrible happening. But these girls are people's sisters and daughters and cousins and grandchildren, and they too have hopes and dreams. I think we become so desensitized because we're bombarded by such terrible news on the daily that we almost try to remove ourselves. But I was reminded of how much I take for granted. The girls that are still in captivity now are the age that the majority of us in this room are. We forget that we can just go to schools and universities and that we can educate ourselves without the fear of being kidnapped or ripped away from our families or even killed. We forget how truly privileged we are. My point is that the first step to solving a problem is bringing awareness. And while we think we probably can't do much about it, getting the conversation going could count towards something in the future. In the famous words of Edmund Burke, all that is necessary for evil to triumph is for good men and women to do nothing.